morning, everybody. There are fresh revelations over the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's handling of the COVID pandemic. The Daily Telegraph has published more of his WhatsApp messages, appearing to reveal a dispute with the then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over whether to close schools in the early stages of the pandemic, with Sir Gavin accusing teachers of looking for an excuse not to work during the pandemic. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock responded saying these are partial accounts, obviously spun with an agenda. They show Matt was focused throughout on saving lives. The right place for a full assessment is the inquiry. Well, let's get more on this, should we? No government minister to speak to this morning. Tamara, this is not going to stop here, is it?
No, absolutely not. And today, these lockdown files, the Telegraph's cache of messages from Matt Hancock, reveal a bitter clash between Mr Hancock and the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson. You'll remember back in January 2021, Gavin Williamson had fought for weeks to keep schools open. Matt Hancock talks in these messages about fighting a rearguard action to make sure schools were closed. I'm sure all parents will remember those chaotic days when Boris Johnson went on television to say schools are going to be opening in January 2021 with that second wave of COVID gathering pace, and just 24 hours later, a complete reverse ferret when he said they would in fact be closed for more than 6 weeks. Now, what these messages reveal is that Gavin Williamson thought he'd won the argument on schools. In fact, Matt Hancock went to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff to say that this was a policy car crash in those messages. And in the end, it was Gavin Williamson who had to, in Matt Hancock's words, eat humble pie. Mr Williamson has spoken to the Telegraph and said that it was an absolutely crushing blow that schools had to close, and he still wonders if he should have resigned over it. What we also see in his extraordinary messages, I mean, alongside Boris Johnson having statistics explained to him by Dominic Cummings, we see Mr Williamson criticising teachers. This goes back to the first lockdown in 2020, saying they were looking for an excuse to avoid having to teach when he was asking Matt Hancock to supply them with PPE. And on that point, we have some tweets from Gavin Williamson last night saying that he was referring, in fact, to teaching unions. He says, further to reports in the Telegraph and other outlets, I wish to clarify these messages were about some unions and not teachers. As demonstrated in the exchange, I was responding regarding unions. I have the utmost respect for teachers who work tirelessly to support students. So extraordinary messages giving us an insight really into how policy was made in these heady days of the pandemic.
OK, Tamara, for now, thank you. In other news, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been asked to vacate their UK home just weeks after the release of Harry's memoir, Spare. The couple have confirmed. A spokesperson for Harry and Meghan said a request has been made for them to give up Frogmore Cottage, close to Windsor Castle. The move is said to have been sanctioned by the King and will remove their remaining foothold in the UK, further weakening ties with the rest of the royal family. Let's get more on this, should we, from Frogmore Cottage. Rachel standing by for us. When did they have to do this by, Rachel? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Well, it's really significant, the timing of this decision confirmed last night by the Sussexes, because, of course, it comes just weeks after the publication of Harry's explosive, highly damning, but also best-selling memoir, Spare, in which he lobbed a series of metaphorical grenades across the Atlantic towards his family, including allegations that Prince William physically attacked him. And also he called the Queen Consort, his stepmother, a dangerous woman, accusing her of having leaked stories about himself and William to the press. Him and his wife, Meghan, were gifted Frogmore Cottage back in 2020. They've been living in California. They were gifted the cottage, for their wedding in 2018. They were gifted the cottage for their wedding. And of course, we know that they've been living in California for the last few years, ever since that royal rift. In the past, they've barely been back to Frogmore Cottage over the past few years. But this news that they've been asked to move out, really significant, further damaging the rift between the royals since the publication of that memoir, Spare. It's reported that Prince Charles has sanctioned this decision and that perhaps he's considering giving it to Prince Andrew, his disgraced younger brother, whose current property is much larger than Frogmore Cottage. Of course, this raises questions. Will the Sussexes be invited to the coronation? And if they did get an invite, or would they even come?
OK, for now, thank you. Interesting that the decision is for after the coronation, so perhaps they'll come for that. Who knows? Time will tell, as they say. Police searching for the baby of Constance Martin and her partner Mark Gordon say a body has been found. They continue to question the couple who were arrested in Brighton on Monday after going on the run in January. They've been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. The search near Brighton for the two-month-old is over after police revealed they'd found remains in woodland. The parents went missing for 2 months but were found on Monday, being questioned, as I said, on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Public inquiry into 2017's Manchester Arena bombing will publish its third and final report today. It will include findings on whether MI5 and counter-terrorism police could have prevented the attack. MI5 first identified the bomber, Salman Abedi, as a subject of interest back in March of 2014, but closed the case 4 months later. MI5 looked at Abedi again in October of 2015 after he visited a convicted terrorist in jail. That case was closed later the same day. Abedi and his brother Hasham made several trips to Libya in the 3 years before the attack. Abedi returned to the UK on the 18th of May. 4 days later, he detonated his homemade bomb at Manchester Arena, killing himself and 22 others and injured hundreds more. Inzamam Rashid has more.
Its mission is to keep our country safe, but the decisions made within the walls of MI5 in the months and years leading up to one of the country's deadliest terror attacks are in the spotlight. Salman Abedi was the subject the security service had eyes on for a number of years, but just days before a high-level meeting to discuss what threat he posed, his homemade suicide bomb murdered 22 people at a pop concert. Just 8 years old, Safi Roussos was one of those victims, the youngest life taken. Her father believes those tasked with protecting her failed.
Salman Abedi should have been stopped before he got to that arena, and that's MI5's job. And MI5 know the threat, they know what these people do and don't do, they know where to look and where not to look, and they are more prepared than what Manchester was that night. So MI5, for me, have got blood on their hands.
After almost 3 years since it began, the Manchester Arena inquiry will publish its third and final report. It will focus on the radicalisation of the Abedi family and will crucially address what was known by the security service about Salman and his links with convicted terrorists. And despite MI5 receiving highly relevant intelligence about Abedi twice in the months prior to his attack, they treated it as non-terrorist criminality. A kick in the teeth for those who lost loved ones.
Obsessed with secrecy, and it's an unhealthy organisation that shies away from any kind of scrutiny. And the question we've been asking is this about national security or national embarrassment?
It's a question that may well be answered, but one the government already has a response to.
My experience of working with all of the intelligence agencies in this country is we're incredibly well served. Of course, there are always lessons to learn, and they are very open to that, but actually they serve this country by definition unseen, and we are very lucky to have such professional intelligence agencies in this country.
But for the families of the 22 victims who've remained at the very centre of this public inquiry, knowing all of this could have been prevented may be the toughest news since that tragic night itself. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News, Manchester.
Emergency workers have searched late into the night for survivors and bodies after a train collision in northern Greece killed at least 43 people. And anger has boiled over in Athens, where protesters set upon the offices of Greece's rail operator. We want to know more about this, don't we? The crash happened near Larissa. Europe correspondent Adam Parsons is there for us. Hello to you. A lot of anger developing there, despite the Transport Secretary resigning yesterday.
Yeah, he resigned. The Prime Minister was here and saying this was an unspeakable and unbelievable crash, but that is the evidence that you can see behind me, that something utterly catastrophic happened. in the past few minutes, we think they have just pulled another body from that wreckage. We know that the number of dead stands at 43, and I think by common consent that is certain to rise, possibly substantially. The anger that we saw on the streets in Athens, the protest outside the Hellenic Train Company, is being replicated, I think, across this country, because while this is an appalling, shocking crash, you can't think of anything more fundamentally worse on a train system than two services crashing into each other head on at a speed, well, certainly the passenger service going at over 100 miles an hour. It is not an enormous surprise. As recently as a month ago, one of the train unions was predicting that something awful could happen on these services. Even the rail regulator said that this service is open to human error. And why? Because of, I think everyone agrees, a long-term chronic lack of investment, really substandard signalling systems. And somehow that may have led to this dreadful crash. A station master from Larissa has been arrested and will be charged officially today with multiple counts of manslaughter.
Thanks a lot. Fractured East-West relations are hanging over what's shaping up to be a contentious meeting of G20 foreign ministers in New Delhi. Neville standing by for us this morning. Last time the Russians were there, a lot of NATO countries walked out.
That's correct. There are two blocks here now, the East and the West, with the East being led by Russia, now backed by China, the West with the US and Britain being leading the way. Well, India is very concerned about the whole meeting being overrun by the Ukraine issue, and they want other issues to be talked about. But it is unlikely so, because the main question now is about the Ukraine war, and America and Britain want this to be discussed thorough.
OK. For now, thanks very much. Thank you. Bola Tinubu has been declared the winner of a highly contentious presidential election in Nigeria, but this is being disputed by his rivals. Been talking about this all week. Yusra is standing by for us. Now, what's the latest today, Yusra? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. The capital seems very calm. Things seem to relatively be going back to normal after a very intense year of campaigning from candidates across different parties. But the Labour Party, one of the main opposition parties, has decided to contest the election results in the courts within the stipulated 21 days. So we will see over the next period more updates on what's happening. But essentially, the people we've spoken to here have said that every election so far in Nigeria has been settled in the courts, and that they expect that the ruling party will come out victorious. The Labour Party themselves told us that they expected the courts to rule in favour of the ruling party, that they were not partial, but they're still putting up a fight. They're not accepting this win. But Bola Ahmed Tinubu has received a certificate, cemented his win, and is now in the capital that will soon become his home.
OK, Yusra, for now, thank you. In other news, actually, let's bring in the Defence Committee Chair, Tobias Ellwood. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Lots to talk about. Should we talk, first of all, about what's happening in India and the fact that last time Russia addressed the Western leaders, they all walked out?
They did indeed. It shows I think the difference between the support that Russia is getting, but also what's happening across the world. We face a dilemma as we lean in and support Ukraine. A lot of countries condemning what Russia's done, but only 34 countries actually had sanctions against Russia. So we need to rally other nations around the world to lean in to support Ukraine and recognise that this isn't just about Ukraine anymore. That's where the theatre of war is actually taking place. This is about a new ideology, or rather an old ideology, of Russia expanding its influence in Eastern Europe. But more worryingly, an alignment between what Russia and what China actually wants to do in challenging our international rules-based order. We go into a very dangerous space when a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invades another state, and another permanent member, China, does nothing about it, does not condemn it. And then the other three permanent members, France, Britain and the United States, are not exactly aligned as to what we should do. So lots of big questions there, leadership required, but also a commitment to see this through in 2023.
Well, the other three are more or less aligned, aren't they? As far as Russia is concerned, you know, they've got a lot of questions to answer. When it comes to China, they've gone to Russia and said, we are trying to help broker a peace deal. As a result, should they be going now to Ukraine to try to do the same?
No, a peace deal right now is supporting Russia because Russia owns 1/5 of Ukraine. So if we allow this conflict to freeze now, that's to Russia's benefit. And then Ukraine isn't able to have that sovereign identity. Its economy won't be able to work in the future. It won't have that long-term security guarantees that we need for peace in Eastern Europe. And what Russia will do is simply calm down, regroup, rearm and do this all again. This is why there's something much, much bigger going on. We've entered a very dark chapter in our history, and we really haven't woken up to that yet. So countries such as India, and I would say South Africa, even Mexico and so forth, not standing up to Russia perhaps in the way that we would expect them to, I think is a worrying reflection of where we are in the world today.
So you're saying the fighting needs to continue for now?
I'm afraid what we need to do is use 2023 to conclude this. We need to lean into this, give Ukraine the weapon systems they need. Russia is in this for the long haul. Their ability to endure hardship is far greater than the West. So if we are to actually stand up for democracies, yes, you're right. You know, Britain, United States and France are more or less in alignment, but we're not utilising NATO in the way that we should do. We're not actually giving the weapon system. It took us an entire year to get the main battle tanks there. And we're having a similar debate of hesitance to do with air power as well. If Ukraine is to ensure that the West is rallying around Ukraine, it needs to gain terrain. To gain terrain, you have to punch through the Russian defences. That's where main battle tanks come in. And to give main battle tanks the advantage, they need the top cover. They need air power. They need fast jets.
Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Certainly, as far as the UK is concerned, we've heard that time and time again from our Defence Secretary, Ben
And then we turned. And then then the penny dropped, and then we slid across Challenger 2 tanks, which weren't necessarily appropriate, but symbolically they then opened up others. And that's brilliant leadership that we're good at.
That's what Ukraine's hoping for.
Absolutely right.
Absolutely. I get that. Why does Turkey not want Finland and or Sweden to join NATO?
Again, this goes to perhaps the alliances that we've seen around the world. Turkey is very much embedded with Russia from a military perspective. They buy some of their weapon systems. They got thrown out of the F-35 fast jet project for that exact reason, even though they're a member of NATO. And it just shows you perhaps the limits of what NATO can actually do. Now, we've created something called the Joint Expeditionary Force, which you could call NATO Light. This is 10 Eastern European countries plus Britain that looks after the High North. If we're to provide security guarantees for Ukraine, I would invite Ukraine to join the Joint Expeditionary Force. And that allows a kit and equipment and support to come far, far faster than what's been provided by NATO, because of the very reason you said, that both Turkey and indeed Hungary are just hesitant to do anything that might upset Russia and indeed Putin.
OK, and to that end, we're hearing about a fence being built. Again, it's going to be symbolic, but it's illustrating where Russia might go next.
Well, this is the problems that we have, is that this isn't just about Ukraine. We must recognise that had we not provided the weapon systems to Ukraine early on, they would have pushed on and absolutely attacked Moldova and then possibly into the Balkans as well. And then there would be a huge threat to the Baltics too. This is so much bigger. This is Russia returning to type, wanting to expand its sphere of influence. And as I said, all the more complicated because the big clash of the century is between the United States and China. And what China is doing is watching very carefully the precedent we set in dealing with the fire in Ukraine. OK,
talk to me about these WhatsApp messages that we're seeing in the Daily Telegraph, suggestions that Sir Gavin Williamson, who I know that you have worked with when he at the Ministry of Defence, saying that teachers didn't want to work during the pandemic. And what was actually happening at the top of government at the time?
These are absolutely important questions, which is why it's so critical that we have a proper inquiry. What we've seen now in the last few days is the Daily Telegraph get an immense amount of data. My concern is that we're going to get this drip feed, as we do, when this data sort of comes out, and then people wanting to provide their angle of their story. I do hope that the inquiry is able to wrap up and provide its conclusions soon, because it's so important that we learn lessons from this. There could easily be another pandemic in the future, mistakes were made. There was no rule book. There was no blueprint for us to follow in the past as to how we respond to this virus. But ultimately, challenges were made, and I think accepting some mistakes were made as well. Yeah. The idea that we sort of pick through individual things, I can't really comment because I don't know the details.
No, but what you can comment on more generally is the fact that, without leaving the detail aside, what does it say about a former health secretary who gives up 100,000 WhatsApp private messages, many of them, one-to-one, end-to-end encrypted, I'm sure there's data protection issues there, to a journalist who he knows is a COVID lockdown denier? What does that say about somebody at the top of government?
The way you articulate the question, I think, speaks volumes. It's not in my character to want to start making personal comments like that. Matt Hancock has chosen his new path of where he wants to go and how he wants to do it. I just hope the inquiry, getting back to politics and the very important questions that many people across the country, including your viewers, will want to know, what happened? What happened in the care homes, with the decisions surrounding those, with loved ones that affected them? That's the details we want. We don't know the exact truth because this is one side of the story and another, all very, very serious. All the more important that the inquiry is made. It could be with the care homes, just to focus on that for a second, that perhaps the inquiry could do a limited study on that and produce that much earlier. I'm worried with these inquiries that they drag on sometimes for years, and that will be, I think, it's unhelpful. We need to get the results now, and I think people want answers as soon as possible.
You circumvented my question, so I'll let you off on that one, but I suppose I'll ask it in a different way, which is, would you release all your WhatsApp messages?
No, I wouldn't. I think that was done for personal gain, and I'm sorry about that. A bigger picture. Look what has happened this last week with our Conservative Party. For the first time, we've illustrated some statecraft that I've not seen for quite some time. That's what the electorate wants to see. Rishi Sunak managed to land that deal, which showed what happens when you have leadership, determination, vision, focus, bridge building, rather than the bombastic partisan aggression that we've had in the past. We're starting to regroup. You saw that in the chamber yesterday in Prime Minister's questions. That's what we should be illustrating, a new culture of wanting to do what's best for the nation. So all these stories about what's happened in the past now, I think are a distraction to where we want to go. We have a possibility of winning the next general election, and we need greater discipline and focus. That's what the nation wants to see.
Yeah. Apparently he did it because she was ghostwriting his book, a book that sold 4,000 copies.
Is that right?
In the first 2 weeks.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, that'll put a smile on your face. Thanks for joining us, as always. Thanks very much. Look at the papers for you now. The Telegraph leads with the latest from Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages, as we're hearing there from the Defence Committee chairman. It's a distraction from what the Prime Minister is trying to do. It's a dispute with the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, to close schools during the pandemic. That's what they're focusing on this morning. Guardian also leads on Hancock saying ministers are concerned about the effect these leaks will have on the official COVID inquiry. Daily Mirror calls it the tragic betrayal. The Metro also leads on the leaks. The Times reports millions will be helped to come off antidepressants and painkillers to tackle addiction. The Eye reports on bird flu and the possibility of vaccinating chickens in the UK to stop bird flu spreading to humans. And The Sun reports on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex being asked to vacate Frogmore Cottage in Windsor. OK, quick look at the Express as well then. There you go. Talking about that eviction as well. Quick look at the weather for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Next few days will stay mainly dry, but the northeast will turn colder over the weekend with chances of wintry showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Snapshot of the world's changing climate. Let's have a look. We got it? Climate dashboard. There we are. No coal, a lot of gas. Renewables are coming up a little bit. That's how much hotter we are since 1880. And this is how many millions of tonnes of CO2 in real time is being put into the atmosphere. Remember, we're asking you what you think the Queen's favourite book is. It's World Book Day today. She's spoken about the importance of reading at an early age and how she's read to her grandchildren, hoping to make them bookworms. Camilla also revealed her favourite childhood tale during a chat with children's laureate Joseph Coelho to mark World Book Day.
I ended up probably being a sort of pony-mad child with Black Beauty, which I howled over night after night after night, and that was...
Well, World Book Day is, of course, a chance for children to dress up as their favourite story characters. Camilla is a long-time supporter of Book Trust and took over as the charity's patron in 2011 from the late Duke of Edinburgh. I suppose the question for you guys today is, World Book Day, are you sending your kids dressed up as their favourite characters? I'm guessing there'll be a lot of Harry Potter and some Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as well, I'm guessing. What are your children dressing up as today for World Book Day? Perhaps you could let us know. You can tweet us if you would like to, at @KBurley, or use the hashtag if you prefer KBurley. And we will share them with our viewers a little bit later on. To the Middle East now. Israel's government is under pressure from its closest ally after the finance minister called for a Palestinian village to be erased. The US State Department spokesperson Ned Price says the comments were repugnant and disgusting. Let's get more, should we? Alistair standing by for us in Jerusalem this morning. What's all this about, Alistair? Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Hawara is a Palestinian town in the West Bank. It was the scene of very heavy rioting over the weekend when a few hundred Jewish settlers came into the town in revenge for the murder of 2 young Israelis over the weekend. And they burnt a number of cars, burnt houses. A lot of Palestinian families had to be rescued, and 1 Palestinian man was killed as a result of the violence. The IDF, the Israeli military, have admitted that they underestimated the situation and got their tactics wrong, and the commander of the area described it as a pogrom. Now, Bezalel Smotrich is the finance minister. He's one of the most senior figures in Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and yesterday on stage at an event he said that he believes the village of Hawara should be wiped out. He did say that shouldn't be done by civilians, it should be done by the Israeli government, but his incredibly incendiary remarks in the United States have reacted very strongly to it. The State Department spokesperson Ned Price, you quoted some of him there. He said, I want to be very clear about this. These comments were irresponsible. They were repugnant. They were disgusting. And just as we condemn Palestinian incitement to violence, we condemn these provocative remarks that also amount to incitement to violence. Now, there's been no condemnation from Benjamin Netanyahu himself or anyone else in the cabinet, but they are coming under a lot of pressure. America, they don't like the Americans getting too involved in what goes on here, but America is a very, very valuable and much-needed ally for the Israelis, and they are now putting the Israeli government under pressure to tone down the language, but also backtrack from those words by the finance minister.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, Sky News has been told that a bird flu strain that infected a girl and her father in Cambodia has mutated to more easily spread to humans. The WHO says it's reviewing its global risk assessment in light of what it calls worrying developments. Our science and medical correspondent Thomas Moore has more.
Just how concerned should we be about the 2 human cases of bird flu in Cambodia? We know they occurred in the south of the country, in Prey Veng province. An 11-year-old girl died and her father also tested positive for the H5N1 virus, but he's well. Genetic testing identified the girl's virus as an endemic variant called 2321C. But the scientist leading the analysis has now told Sky News that the bird flu virus had mutations that helped it adapt to human cells.
There are some indications that, this virus has gone through a human. So what we have to understand is that when a virus gets into a new host, they are very promiscuous, they change very quickly, and they do adapt.
But that doesn't mean the virus can spread between people, at least not yet. It latches on to a type of cell receptor which is only found deep down in our lungs. For it to transmit easily between people, it has to mutate to target a different receptor found on cells in our nasal passages. That's what regular winter flu does. The cells are not only easier to infect, but a cloud of virus is released with every breath. But Dr. Carlson warns the world must closely track the virus and work on test kits and vaccines just in case it changes.
It is concerning that it's gone global so quickly, and I think the entire influenza community, as well as the public health and animal health communities, are quite concerned about it. Obviously, in the UK, in all of Europe, as well as North America, South America, there's been massive poultry infections. There's been spillovers into mammals, and each one of those spillovers into mammals is a concern.
Here, the UK Health Security Agency reported a human case of bird flu in January 2022. And so far this winter, there have been more than 3,000 exposures to the H5N1 virus in people working closely with sick birds. None of them tested positive. Health officials are also analysing a small number of samples taken from patients with flu-like symptoms to check the virus isn't spreading below the radar. It's not just Cambodia at risk. The next pandemic could start anywhere.
And, of course, we'll keep an eye on that story for you. Meantime, I want to talk to you about what's happening with the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing, which will be published later on today. 22 people were killed and hundreds were injured. Robbie Potter was just 10 feet away from the suicide bomber when he set off his explosives. He's with us now. Hi, Robbie. How are you?
Good morning. All okay?
I am okay. I wondered how you were feeling about the report being published later on today, bringing back lots of memories for you.
Unfortunately, yes, it will do, yes.
Perhaps you can tell me about what happened to you on the night.
Unfortunately, I received nuts to my shoulders, one through my heart, my lungs, and both kneecaps, and obviously multiple other injuries.
Talk to me about, I think you were just, 10 feet or so away, were you, from the bomber?
Yeah, I was very close, yes.
Yeah. What did you notice about him at the time?
He obviously had quite a big backpack on, but looked like someone was looking for students, but looking back now, obviously looked very nervous.
Yeah. And then you found yourself in a position where you were severely injured. How long did it take for people to come and help you?
I believe it was over half an hour. I was lucky because the British public were brilliant. They turned me over, tried to stop the blood using souvenir T-shirts as much as they could.
Yeah. What do you hope that the report finds later on today?
More the truth out and how adequate the security were in the build up to it, but not taking away from the fact that the people who did this are the ones we've really got to concentrate on.
Yeah. Do you feel that during the course of the inquiry that your voice and the voice of others that were injured has been heard by those that are writing the report?
No, we've all sent our statements in. We've had no contact or.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand that. And how's life been like since?
It's just a long rebuilding. Obviously, you can't let them beat you. So, I mean, I'm still obviously having treatment now. But, you know, I'm back up on my feet. I can't play rugby again, which is a big killer. But, you know, there's a lot of people a lot worse, a very lot worse than what happened to me. So we have to be thankful for that.
So what does normal life look like for you now? What would you do on a normal day?
I have to get up a lot early. I have to do a lot of stretching, move, obviously take a lot of tablets, unfortunately, so I rattle a bit. But I said I can't look back because I am very, very lucky to hear, because excellent work for what my surgeon did in the NHS, but also the amount of British people who actually saved me on that day.
And have you managed to keep in touch with any of the people that were also caught up in it at the time?
Yeah, we have a few different groups, not like whatever, and we seem to get in touch mainly around Christmas and obviously around the anniversary. People are still sort of just trying to move on. So hard things to put to the back of your mind.
And where will you be later on to find out what the report has suggested?
To be honest with you, I'm probably going to take the dog for a walk, and I'll wait till I get all the information through sent later on. A few reporters like yourselves have been very good and update and put it into language that we can actually understand.
Yeah, I know it's going to be a tough day for you, Robbie, so thanks for taking the time to join us this morning. Enjoy the walk with the dog and just take it easy today. Thank you.
Okay, cheers, very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Looking at some other headlines for you this morning, and Sir Keir Starmer is considering recruiting senior civil servant Sue Gray to be his new Chief of Staff. Ms Gray is, of course, best known for her report into lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street. Labour says the process is ongoing and so far nobody has been offered the job. MPs say a loophole which allows sex offenders to change their name and evade justice must be closed. Between 2019 and 2022, there were around 11,500 prosecutions of sex offenders for failing to notify police about a change in their personal information, such as their name. There's been a 66% rise in children and young people getting urgent treatment for eating disorders in England since 2019. That's according to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which says all English regions are failing to meet targets for when patients should be seen because services are flooded with referrals. 4 spears, which were brought to England more than 250 years ago, are to be returned to Australia. They were among many taken from an Indigenous camp by Captain Cook and his crew after landing at what's now Botany Bay in Sydney. The local Indigenous people regard the spears as national treasures. Now, a portrait by Pablo Picasso of his daughter Maya sold last night at auction for £18 million. The piece, filled with exuberant colour, we're told, was painted in 1938 when Maya, just 2.5 at the time. The auction at Sotheby's was the first time the work has gone under the hammer since 1999, when it sold for 3.7 million. Gianni Versace's collection of 25 Picasso works, it was part of that. There we are. And some quick news about us. Sky News has won the Royal Television Awards News Channel of the Year for the 6th consecutive year. The judges praised our impressive range of coverage, strong presentation, creative production and commitment to reporting the issues that matter most to the audience. Chief Correspondent Stuart Ramsey was named Network TV Journalist of the Year. His reporting from Ukraine last year included dramatic footage of him and his team coming under fire and being forced to run for safety as bullets peppered their vehicle. Staying in Ukraine, where evidence continues to emerge of alleged Russian war crimes, which Moscow denies. In the southern city of Kherson, recently recaptured from Russian forces, there are indications that rooms in some buildings were used as torture chambers. The human rights lawyer Wayne Jordash is leading a team investigating war crimes in Ukraine. He is in Kiev and joins us now. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Tell us what you discovered.
Well, we are supporting the prosecution, and the prosecution are doing the investigation. And what they've uncovered is evidence of up to 20 detention centres. They've investigated 2 of them with real thoroughness, and can also investigate some of the connections between the detention centres and the Russian government. So what we see is a system of detention and brutality where hundreds of people disappeared and were tortured, and at least 400 of them are missing, and at least 400 of them are suspected of being killed. So what we have is really a small part of the overall criminal plan being revealed in Kherson.
How do we know who was running these sites and how were they first discovered?
Beg your pardon, my dog is just... could you repeat the question,
dogs
please?
On this show, no problem with dogs, not at all. Just talk to me about how you discovered these sites and who potentially was running them.
Well, the prosecution discovered them through essentially interviewing witnesses, victims of these detention centres, the ones who managed to escape or their family members. And what we're talking about is a broad range of people, ranging from those who were connected to the military or the security, but not just them, journalists, human rights activists, volunteers, family members of those who were suspected of being involved with the military or the security services of Ukraine. This was effectively a system which was designed to take out any resistance to the overall criminal plan, and the overall criminal plan was designed to essentially subjugate the remainder of the population and extinguish identity. And that means removing any trace of Ukrainian identity from the educational curriculum, from the road signs, destruction of cultural artifacts, and so on and so forth. And what we also see is financial links, and this is what shows a clear link, other than the system, which is appears to be uniform across detention centres. You have these clear financial links back to Russia. And of course, you also have those who are involved in the detention centres, from the Russian FSB to local FSB to the Russian prison service, and so on and so forth. So there's plenty of pieces of evidence which point, irrefutably, I would say, towards the Russian state funding these detention centres, planning them, designing how they should work.
What have the survivors been telling you about what happened to them?
Well, if you disappeared into one of these detention centres, life became extremely grim. We're talking about electrocutions, we're talking about sexual violence, ranging from electrocution of genitals to rape, to threats of rape. We're talking about waterboarding, we're talking about various types of suffocation, and we're talking about a system within Kherson where anybody could disappear into these detention centres, and it didn't matter, in fact, whether they were, in fact, connected to the Ukrainian government. What mattered was, in an increasingly paranoid and brutal environment, that the Russian occupiers considered that to be the case. This was lawlessness on steroids.
Is this confirmation of genocide by Russia?
I would say it looks very close. If you have a criminal plan, which is baked into that plan is war crimes and crimes against humanity, which is clear. This is the Russian military campaign. If you're going to subjugate a population and take away from them what they fiercely hold on to, their identity, you can't do that without war crimes and crimes against humanity. That is why we see such a widespread and systematic use of crimes against civilians in Ukraine. However, what if that fails? If that fails, there's only one direction that plan goes into, which is the physical destruction, which is at the heart of a genocidal plan. So the Russian plan is to essentially subjugate. They will do that through violence. They will achieve a cultural they will extinguish culture if they can, but if it fails, I think with Kherson, what we see is the level of destruction elevate and escalate to such a level that we're talking about very close to, if not indeed, actual genocide.
How does this progress? What happens next?
Well, the investigations proceed. The Ukrainian prosecution, the Kherson prosecutors are working tirelessly with not enough resources, it has to be said, but they continue to map what is an unprecedented volume of crimes. And then what happens is, once that's mapped at the ground level, then the hard work of building the cases towards the upper political and military leadership begins. And I think that's what we're trying to help the prosecution with, because they're overwhelmed with so many crimes on the ground. But the real challenge is to build these cases upwards and to see how far they go.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Welcome.
Quick look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The next few days will stay mainly dry, but the northeast will turn colder over the weekend with the chance of wintry showers. Central parts will have a fairly mild but dull rush hour with a little rain in places, while the north and south will be sunnier with the frost in the countryside.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's return to our top story. The fallout from Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages, which shed light on his handling of the pandemic. Earlier this hour, I spoke to Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood about them. Would you release all your WhatsApp messages?
No, I wouldn't. I think that was done for personal gain, and I'm sorry about that. You know, a bigger picture. Look what has happened this last week with our Conservative Party. For the first time, we've illustrated some statecraft that I've not seen for quite some time. That's what the electorate wants to see. Rishi Sunak managed to land that deal, which showed what happens when you have leadership, determination, vision, focus, bridge building rather than the bombastic partisan aggression that we've had in the past. We're starting to regroup. You saw that in the chamber yesterday in Prime Minister's questions. That's what we should be illustrating, a new culture of wanting to do what's best for the nation. So all these stories about what's happened in the past now, I think are distractions to where we want to go.
Well, a spokesperson for Matt Hancock responded saying, these are partial accounts, obviously spun with an agenda. They show Matt was focused throughout on saving lives. The right place for a full assessment is the inquiry. And this was Gavin Williamson's response to the story in The Telegraph this morning. Further to reports in The Telegraph and other outlets, I wish to clarify that these messages were about some unions and not teachers. As demonstrated in the exchange, I was responding regarding unions. I have the utmost respect for teachers who work tirelessly to support students.